The Conjuring, as I've talked about lots in the past, is arguably the movie that we have to thank for the massive reinvigoration of popularity in the horror genre that we had through the 2010s. And I do think that part of why horror is in the amazing state that it's in now is thanks to the eyes that this franchise welcomed to the genre. That being said, the movie wasn't the first from James Wan to encompass that same approach to horror, with Insidious, written by longtime collaborator Leigh Whannell, releasing 3 years earlier. And while it's pretty clear which franchise went on to be widely preferred based on the fact that The Conjuring is the most lucrative franchise in horror history, Insidious has a lot to offer and still manages to stand quite comfortably on its own. I know for me, this movie was a pretty big deal when it came out and definitely helped suck me further into the horror genre when I was a kid. And while I do think that The Conjuring is overall the better movie, there's something particularly in the stylistic decisions and some of the tone of this one that really sets it apart. The Conjuring has a warmth to it that, while not entirely absent here, certainly isn't felt to the same extent, and the movie leaves on a much darker note than what Wan would go on to make a few years later. There's a dark, dreamy, surreal feel to Insidious that makes it well worth revisiting over 15 years later, and it's also what we have to thank for one of the coolest depictions of the other side that we've ever gotten in the horror genre with The Further. It's also nice that Insidious doesn't come with the baggage of needing to separate your viewing experience from any supposed real-world events, since it's thankfully not inspired by some questionable people, so we can go through this whole video without needing to throw in any caveats about the ethics. This is one of those videos I know I'd someday make since I started this channel, so let's finally begin our dive into this franchise and take a look at James Wan and Leigh Whannell's Insidious. Now, this guy's movies are often largely associated with cheap jump scares and a lack of deeper themes, and while I'm not going to sit here and pretend that, his movies have some intricate underlying commentary or that some of the scares aren't super gimmicky, I also think that this reputation is wildly unfair and sells him very short in regards to the things that he genuinely does super well. The two things for me that make this movie such a distinct joy are the super distinct style that he brings to the table as a director, with a super strong understanding of aesthetics and vibes, alongside the nice heart that he often has in the depiction of the families his films follow. The opening scene of Insidious is a really great example of the kind of thing I'm talking about. Honestly, I think that the opening scene might be the best part of the whole thing, which may be unfortunate from the perspective of wishing that the whole movie felt the way this sequence does, but it doesn't quite feel right to say that the opening scene being too good for the movie is something to complain about. The first look at this pale, glowing circular light already sells the tone really well by sort of feeling like a dreamy moon before we fade into the bedroom of a child whom we're yet to learn the identity of, and we begin to slowly float through the dark and strange feeling house. The transition from seeing this shadow behind the curtain to the horrifying looking demon standing in the dark hallway while holding a candle is something that I'm fairly sure altered my brain chemistry permanently the first time I saw it, and then we explode into the title card. Meeting this world through this dark, dreamy, gothic imagery is something that always gets me hyped up when I start the movie. I'm gonna say something that's sure to be super age specific here, but the opening credits of Insidious bring me back to 2000s horror flash games, and I absolutely love that. Anyone who played House will know what I'm talking about. We just get these nice, eerie images with some spooky shit in the background while the credits come up on screen with their astral spirits floating away from their physical forms as they venture off into the further. The visual aesthetic of this whole thing is so goddamn good, as can be said for much of this movie, but the thing that really makes it such an impactful opening is the music. Joseph Bashara handled the score for Insidious, and I'm being 100% sincere when I say this. To this day, it's one of my favorite soundtracks in horror. Without a doubt, inspired by some of the score from The Exorcist, it's very string-focused with these really unsettling swells and explosions of frenetic violins and cellos, and I have a distinct memory of, and I'm exposing how obsessed with horror I've always been here, brushing my teeth at night while listening to this soundtrack on my earbuds and getting freaked out by my own reflection. Good times. The soundtrack is, for lack of a better word, sinister. You can't predict me. What's really impressive about this is that this style of composition for horror is something that's been around for a very long time, and we have tons of examples of stylistically similar soundtracks, but Insidious still manages to sound super distinct because of how well it commits to that sound and finds ways to make it creepier than most applications of this style. That's not to say that the score is only effective in its horror, because there's also a lot of music that Bashar wrote that's more melancholic and wistful, focusing largely on some soft piano playing that really helps to accentuate the more emotional side of the story. What I love so much about this side of the music is that it almost feels like it's something that's being played by a spirit who's lost in the further, or like we're hearing some soundtrack that Renee's spirit is writing from another plane as she remembers what happens when she was alive. It's really beautiful stuff and creates a super distinct atmosphere for the movie. It's one of the big things that I do think makes Insidious stand out from The Conjuring, because while certain elements aren't realized as well here as they were there, that wistful, melancholic feel is unique to Insidious, and I love it. It's also, of course, tied into the look of the film, which is about as desaturated as you can get without being considered black and white. There are certain moments of the film where there's some more color pumped into the grade, which is nice to see, and because of how intensely desaturated the movie is, it's very obvious when we get something with a bit more life to it. But there are some moments where it feels like the grade is kind of inconsistent without that purpose. I like that when Renee has the priest over, there's some more color than what we're accustomed to at that point, but it's nothing compared to when Elise shows up for the first time. That just feels like a nice way of reflecting how she's getting closer and closer to the person who will actually be able to help her. That was cool, but there's a bit during the climax when everything's pretty intense and dangerous where there's also a little more color and it doesn't really make sense here. It's just not as consistent as I think it could have been, but it's still an effective artistic decision when there's intention behind it. It's cool to see this as a sort of transition point for Juan, where it feels like he's right in the middle of the styles that we see in The Conjuring and what he'd done earlier in Saw. You have those wide-angle tracking shots and framing that feels more like what we've come to expect, but then you get certain moments, in particular when they're setting up some gear towards the end of the movie, where that Saw DNA comes out loud and clear. From a technical standpoint, while Insidious can be a little messy at times, it's really effective. The aesthetic side of the film is very strong and creates a nice atmosphere that always draws me back into this world very easily, and Bashar's score truly is at the peak of the mountain. Something that I really appreciate about Juan's work is his ability to make family dynamics that you can get wrapped up in and grow to really care about, which helps a lot when the horror comes around, because you just want them to be alright. The first two Conjuring movies do a fantastic job of this, and while Insidious doesn't approach it in quite the same way, and I don't feel like it's as successful here, there's some stuff that I just didn't pick up on when I saw this as a kid that I've really come to appreciate as I've continued to revisit the film. What we have here, while not a completely dysfunctional family or anything like that, is certainly not quite as warm as the parents are, but they do some really good stuff with how Josh's repressed childhood memories impact the way that he goes on to interact with his family. It's pretty clear from the early moments of the film that Josh, played by the always charming Patrick Wilson, is the breadwinner of the house and is also rather avoidant. Renee is taking some time away from work to focus on writing music, and she's also got her hands quite full with taking care of the kids, managing the house, unpacking and setting up after their recent move here. She's juggling a lot, and while Josh is described as being avoidant even prior to the spooky shit starting, once things start getting really stressful with Dalton, he begins to stay late at work and sleep there, lying to Renee and telling her that he has to stay late to grade tests. We'll learn at a point that the reason Dalton doesn't wake up from his coma is because of the fact that when he's asleep, he essentially astral projects into the further, thinking that he's simply dreaming and unknowingly leaving his physical body open for other entities in the further to take over. And the fall that he has early on in the movie where he hits his head likely left him more vulnerable to being lured further out, well, into the further, which then leaves his body even more vulnerable to this kind of thing. The ability to leave his physical self behind like this is something that's inherited from his father, but Josh is unaware of this until the third act of the film. Essentially, the way that they solved the problem of Josh traveling into the further when he was younger was by psychically repressing the memories of his ability to do so. Now, this explanation doesn't hold up all that well to scrutiny, since he obviously started doing this as a kid and didn't need to remember how. It's something that comes naturally to him. There's no reason given as to why he wouldn't just slowly return to traveling without knowing it this time. But whatever, it's an explanation I'm willing to accept on the grounds of it being part of Elise's psychic know-how. So with it in mind that the defense mechanism that was designed to protect him from his travels is essentially just blocking out freaky stuff, It's cool to see how that extended into his adult life with the way that he approaches challenging situations, with Dalton's coma being no different. It was basically ingrained into him without him even remembering that he had to hide from things like these, and that's exactly what we see from him. They do a really good job of making you frustrated with him as Renee is at home by herself taking care of their son late into the night while he stays at work, sleeps, and then lies to her about it when she asks him what's going on. It's also important to note, though, that he's not a terrible person or anything. Despite not believing her initially when she says that she believes that the house is haunted, the dude is still entirely willing to uproot their lives that they were still just settling into and move into a new house again, which by the looks of things is being done solely on his dollar. He's sweet, he seems good with the kids when he's around, and he clearly does care to make sure that Renee is happy and comfortable and doesn't want her afraid. It's also refreshing to see that Insidious finds a way to properly justify a character not believing someone else when the spooky shit is going on, both because he's often just not around for the events that lead her to believe this, but also because of how it's tied into his backstory. Maybe my favorite moment of the entire movie, outside of that banger of an opening scene, is when Josh finally accepts that what Elise says is true, where after he kicks her out of the house, he goes up to Dalton's bedroom and notices that the drawings on his wall line up exactly with what she said was going on. There is such a melancholic, dreamy feel to this as he looks at the colorful, happy drawings detailing this child following a path that he's completely unaware is putting him in existential danger, while that brilliant score accentuates the whole thing. It's just an extremely emotionally effective moment that's a big turning point for Josh as his memories slowly bleed back into his mind, since the situation with Dalton is the first thing since he's repressed those memories that had any chance of bringing them back up to the surface. I just really like how they handle Josh's character. He's not just the standard dad in a horror movie, not listening to the mom when she claims that something spooky is going on. His arc feels like it had some solid thought put into it, and he's doing a hell of a lot to take care of his family, even if he could be more present for them at times. As for Renee, she's kind of like the beating heart of the movie. And, you know, Patrick Wilson became iconic in these kinds of horror movies after The Conjuring, and Lynn Shay, rightfully so, is the other huge focal point. These guys are iconic. Renee is played by Rose Byrne, and from the first moments that we spend with her, they did a fantastic job of getting us wrapped up in this character. I think she's very underrated. The hectic, busied, split-focus moment of trying to get the kids ready for school while also working with the nightmare of call centers and only just now learning in this moment that Josh can neither drive the kids to school nor pick them up and never mentioned it. I mean, I just feel bad for her right off the bat, especially when this is contrasted by Josh in a quiet bathroom on his own, plucking out gray hairs. She's a really sweet character, and I love the moments of her working on her music as they give the movie a very natural way of getting across information about her. It's cool too because this isn't really something that she ever talks about anywhere else, so we're getting a peek into the more private side of her head as she writes a song about feeling like she wishes for more in her life and knows that she'll eventually get to the point where she feels fulfilled. Her pursuit of music isn't a focal point of the movie or anything, but it's a nice touch that gives her character a bit more dimension. The other thing that they do to help get us invested in her is withholding Josh's backstory, so we don't have any sort of justification for his avoidance of the situation with Dalton until much later on, which means that we can spend this while getting wrapped up in Renee's frustrations as she feels like she's needing to take on all of the care and worry for Dalton.
You're not here with me in this situation. You're just...
One scene that always stands out to me is when Renee is being shown how to insert the tube into Dalton's throat. First off, this is just something that no parent should ever have to do, and it's fucking heartbreaking to watch. I don't know if they hired an actual nurse for this scene or what, but the way that she talks is exactly what you'd expect to hear were you really in this situation. Insidious handles the experience of these parents dealing with their son being in an inexplicable coma really well, and moments like this lend a lot to building up that emotional side of the story. The only actual problem that I have with her characterization, and this isn't just something that's, limited to her character, it's a problem throughout the movie, is that at times it can feel like new pieces of information that would need more justification before settling in are accepted a little too quickly. Her finding the bloody handprint in Dalton's bed feels strange at first and she doesn't immediately call for the nurse, but we learn that this is because she's convinced at this point that whatever's happening to her son is supernatural. I don't have any inherent problem with this, but it feels, at least to me, a little sudden that she's come to this conclusion, despite her having experienced some strange shit, because they don't establish at any point early on what she does or doesn't believe in. It would have helped a lot to even just one very simple moment earlier on indicating that maybe she already has some level of belief in the the paranormal, since that would make it feel smoother seeing her come to that conclusion that this is what's going on with Dalton. The same thing happens with Josh when he sees those pictures on the wall, where it seems like they wanted to have his character arc go from not believing what Renee says to coming around on it, but it happens too quickly. I love the scene, like I mentioned, but I mean, this change in his character goes, one scene he's completely against it, to the next seeing the drawings, then the very next scene is him telling Renee to call Elise back. But yeah, aside from wishing they'd done a bit more to clarify what she was believing, I really like Renee's character. Elise! We love Elise. Lynn Shay is just always a joy to see, and she's been around in the horror world for a long time. She's got a minor role in A Nightmare on Elm Street, which is always cool to see, and she's stuck around for good reason. Insidious was really the thing that brought her into tons more horror movies, and she works a lot on cool smaller films now, but Elise is a character that I've always had a big soft spot for. Shay just brings this really great warmth to the character, and while there isn't anything that necessarily stands out with Elise when compared to the multitude of mediums we have in the horror genre, it's her portrayal that's always clicked with me. That sweet, caring, and powerful presence that she has is wonderful, and it's also thanks to her that we get one of the best things about Insidious.
It's the most important part of her process.
That's debatable.
Specs and Tucker, fuck yeah, baby! I love these guys. Lee Winnell and James Wan have been working together forever, and it's always cool to see Winnell on camera, even if his accent sometimes starts to bleed through. No one's saying he's the greatest actor in the world.
That wasn't psychic. Elise already told me your name, so...
Specs and Tucker are kind of the perfect thing to point to. Whenever people shit on James Wan movies and say like, man, that's not real horror, Hereditary is real horror, and it's like, my dude, do you think these movies are even remotely attempting to achieve the same purpose? This is just meant to be fun, entertaining horror with some dope vibes and cool scares. It's not the same thing. It doesn't need to be in order to be also good. These guys are basically Elise's assistants. Wow. They're constantly trying to one-up each other through the importance of their respective work or the gear that they bring along. This movie can be kind of drab at times since the storyline is a lot sadder than The Conjuring, so it's a nice change of pace to get these two in here and give some really solid comic relief for the story. Despite not showing up until quite a ways into the runtime and being featured far less than Josh and Renee, they've gone on to be much more the focus of the franchise alongside Elise than the main characters in this story, and I think that was definitely the right decision. I've never grown tired of seeing them bounce off of each other, and I'm not sure I ever will. The only characters who I find to be rather forgettable in the movie are the kids. That's not a jab against their actors. You're never going to see me shitting on child actors on this channel. It's just that Dalton's pretty much only here to motivate the parents and have his situation drive the story forward. You get a nice scene between him and his mother fairly early on in the film as she's looking through the photo books, but that's about it. His brother Foster is so forgettable that I had to look up his name when writing this video because I just couldn't remember it. From what I can tell, he is here to deliver a creepy line about Dalton walking around in his sleep, and that's about all there is to him. Would have been really nice to get a bit more of a hook with these kids because, that would help to raise the stakes, but it's not the biggest deal since the other stuff is still handled very well. The roughest part of this movie, without much of a doubt, is that some of the dialogue comes off super stiff and unnatural. At times, this serves the story as the characters are meant to feel disconnected, but I also won't act like it's all an intentional creative decision. Some of the writing is just a little too forced, and it's something that could have matured a bit more. You've also got some pretty overdone material here with the whole "it's not the house that's haunted, it's you" type thing, but I'm not one to automatically hold tropes against a movie so long as they're still well done, and while hearing that line said kind of instinctually makes me roll my eyes at this point, it's not the end of the world, and to be fair, it does seem like something that would actually come up in this situation. Then you have Elise's super dramatic speech about what the further is, which I feel like could have been toned down a fair bit to make it feel more natural, especially considering Elise knows that she's explaining this to someone who's completely against the idea that this could be anything supernatural. Would have helped to ease into it a bit, but also, to be fair, she is talking about a dark alternate reality, so maybe a little difficult to make it sound chill. The whole leave this vessel moment is another one that I feel like is just kind of corny and not really in the charming way that I find a lot of Wan's work to be. Is that really all you have to say? No invocation of anything? No ritualistic speech? Just, hey man, get out of here. I mean, maybe that's just because Lynn Shay is extremely compelling. It would work for me if I was possessing someone. Alright, well that's enough of that nonsense. What of the scares in Insidious? Well, I already gushed a fair bit about the atmosphere of this film, which, while I don't think the incredible feel of that opening scene is maintained as consistently as I would have liked it to be, it's definitely a big part of the draw. I've always been a fan of how James Wan handles the presence of spirits from another time in his movies, and Insidious is no exception to that. Is there anything in the movie that scares me? I mean, when I was like, I don't know, 9 or 10 seeing the movie for the first time, sure, but no, I don't find anything here actually freaked me out. I do have a distinct memory of being a child and watching Insidious for the first time though, and being scared and needing to hide behind a pillow, and I was playing Battlefield Bad Company 2 on my iPod Touch. That being said, I do really appreciate how Juan goes about his scares, and having grown up at a time when this kind of thing was a big focus in horror, I have a huge soft spot for some good ooga booga, and Insidious has got some good ooga booga. I remember my cousin showing me the scene of the two ghosts appearing in the hallway while Tucker is using that color wheel thing, and there's a cool feel to that scare even if it isn't anything all that special. The scene of the young kid playing around with Renee is one that I really appreciate because of how well it gets across the feeling of this guy floating in from another time with him switching the record that Renee was listening to Tiptoe Through the Tulips by Tiny Tim. It's a lot of T's, which is now forever associated for me with Insidious. The off-putting joy of the song in this context leads itself really well to a rather unsettling atmosphere, and the quiet, gray day with the soft blowing curtains helps to accentuate that feeling. Mind you, she was listening to Nouveau Bianche, and that was one of the first pieces of music I ever learned how to play, so I do have some beef with this kid, but it's alright. He's got moves. I know that this could be seen as kind of silly, but I really want to emphasize how much I love the feel of this moment. I also feel like if I'm making a video about Insidious, I can't really get away with not talking about the most famous scare of the movie, with the man with fire on his face appearing behind Josh as his mother talks about a dream that she had. It's famous for good reason, and is definitely one of the best things to show someone if you want to get a good jump scare reaction, but I'm gonna wait a sec before talking about this demon. I really like the sort of icy sound before the camera cuts to the shot. Not my favorite scare of the movie, but it definitely earned its reputation. Now, that's all just build up to the coolest thing about Insidious, and it's really the thing that lent itself to this becoming a franchise. The further is sick as hell. We've no shortage of depictions of the spirit world, but this one is basically the coolest haunted house you've ever been through. I wouldn't be surprised if this has happened already, but I would absolutely love if someone could come around and do an actual haunted house of this. The further is a dark labyrinth of vaguely depicted spots in the real world, littered with spirits from all times and planes shared by the deceased and the demonic, the tragic and the malicious. It just feels so strange and otherworldly, with moments like this crying woman in the corner being gone when Josh looks back to her, creating this sense of time fading in and out, like we're not sure if we're actually seeing spirits or the remnants of whatever tortured souls have wandered here before. My favorite part though has to be the great sequence where Josh stumbles on a family who looks like they came out of the 1950s, sitting perfectly still, with the exception of their blinks, the whistling father, and the slight shake in their movement, making the whole thing feel wildly unpredictable. It's extremely off-putting, and my favorite part of this scene is how they lean further into the feeling that things just don't work right here. When he finds this creepy-ass woman in the other room, hears a gunfire, and goes back to the family to see that the woman he was just in the other room with is now holding a gun and had shot the family, leaving only this horrid grin on her face. That scene being constructed solely through dream logic gives it such a nightmarish sense, and I absolutely love it. Then there's the layer of the demon, and I have some stuff to say about this dude. Now dubbed the lipstick-faced demon, this movie only refers to him as the man with fire on his face, and I'm gonna go with something like that since it's cooler. So, if we look at this demon, a couple things come to mind. First one is Darth Maul. The second is, wow, I don't think I've ever seen a less creative depiction of a demon in my life. I can relate with both of those. However, I've actually come to really appreciate that this is an extremely traditional depiction of a demon that fully embraced even the parts of them that we've come to see as silly, like the forked tongue and stuff like that. I also love that the face is red, since that's such a powerful contrast to the color palette of most of this movie. It makes him really stand out. The reason that I've come to really like this is precisely because it's a super traditional look. Like, this could have been ripped out of, like, old demonic paintings, and you can expect to see similar things in movies like Haxan. So when I take a step back from, wow, that's kind of goofy, and instead look at it from the angle of, man, that's like one-to-one how we historically saw demons depicted. It's kind of cool to see a more modern movie completely embrace that instead of feeling like it always has to be subverted. Then I'm down for it. I think part of the thing that makes it much easier to accept this is that they fully committed to it, with the gothic cathedral layer filled with rolling fog and tons of candles. Like, they're just leaning into it, and that makes me appreciate it a lot more. Does it scare me? No. Is it fucking cool? Yeah, man, it is. We're looking at a demon layer in a dark alternate dimension with a super old school demon design and insane gothic vibes. I can't even begin to say I'm not into it. On top of being really into the further itself, the sequence of these spirits all swarming the house as they're drawn here after following Josh back is really damn cool. It works out ultimately, and Dalton wakes up, which Renee welcomes by spending something like 7 hours repeating how she's never letting him go to sleep again. But the big thing to talk about with this ending is the actual final moments, which are so cool and genuinely shocking. When Josh hands Elise a photo, she reacts to something that we're not yet shown. She takes a picture of him, which causes an explosion of violent anger unlike anything we've seen up to this point. Now, Josh being uncomfortable having his photo taken is something that's been present since the start, and the reason for that is tied into the spirit who attempted to take his body when he used to travel as Dalton does, which is that super cool looking spirit from the opening scene. She would appear in photos, getting closer to him in every one, and while he repressed these memories, the feeling of not wanting to be photographed stuck around. That being said, this level of anger is not characteristic of him. Especially when he fucking kills Elise right then and there, strangling her on the couch and leaving a haunting expression plastered on her face after she saw whatever she did when she took that photo. Now, I think they should have left it there. I'm fine with them having Renee come up and find Elise's body. That moment is well done. But what bothers me is that they immediately show that Elise saw his hand was looking rather demonic and then saw the spirit in the black dress when she took the photo. I really wish they hadn't shown this. The hand is fine. The photo for me is a step too far. The implication of what happened through Elise's reaction was more than enough to leave the impact that this ending was going for. And immediately showing the scene again but revealing what happened is always deflating to me. It's still a super cool and unexpected ending. I think especially if you're returning to it after watching The Conjuring or something like that, since those always have pretty happy endings, but I feel like it would have been way creepier if they just left what she actually saw up to the imagination. James Wan also did the same thing with Lorraine's dream in The Conjuring, but at least he waited another movie before ruining that. There's actually an example much earlier on in Insidious that I feel like struck a much better balance of wanting to imply and show things, where Elise is describing the demon that she sees in Dalton's room to Specs while he draws it. You can make out what she's saying if you pay attention, but we never see anything there. The only thing that we do get is the drawing of the demon that Specs has. The feeling of hearing her describe this while all we see is the shadowy corner of the room does something to my brain, and I just wish we'd had something more like that in this end scene. Insidious is far from a perfect movie. Scenes like the demon chasing after Dalton and somehow not immediately catching him, Josh being able to fight off a spirit who's a hell of a lot more familiar with the further than he is. I know they say he's alive and therefore he can fight, but like, alright. Some of the writing feels rather immature. The movie's got its issues, but I still think it's a good time. Definitely not as strong of a film as The Conjuring, but that's okay. I'm probably more forgiving of its shortcomings since I have so much nostalgia wrapped up in it, but I've never not had a good time watching Insidious, even if it's not one that I revisit on a regular basis. That James Wan style is something I've always appreciated. The story has some cool shit going on, the scares are gimmicky but fun, and the aesthetic of the movie is fucking fantastic. How do you feel about Insidious? Do you like it? You don't like it? I don't feel like it gets talked about quite as much as I would like to talk about it. Do you think one of the sequels is better? Let me know. Thanks for watching through to the end. I hope you enjoyed the video enough that you want to see more, and if that's the case, consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell because YouTube can sometimes suck at recommending channels. A huge thank you to my wonderful Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members who are a massive help in allowing me to continue committing as much time as I can to making these videos. If you want to gain access to things like behind the scenes material or gain early access to my videos, consider supporting me on either platform. As always, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.